The following brief has been created with open source information found in books as well as on the internet. However, do take it with a pinch of salt, however, as some aspects have been kept secret due to said country's Official Secrets Act, or we just don't know, and sometimes the best place is actually Wikipedia. So with that said and done, let's get started with today's video. In 1904, Admiral Fisher was appointed the first Sea Lord, and in his crazy mad ways, he pushed the Board of Admiralty to arm the next class of armoured cruisers with 12-inch guns, thus dubbing them a dreadnought armoured cruiser. The idea was to have the armament of a dreadnought, but the speed of an armoured cruiser. Armour was to be the same thickness as a Minotaur class that preceded them, but thicker over larger areas. All in all, a large, fast and well-armed vessel, but not very well armoured. Thus, you'd get the Invincible-class. But our story is going to start across the North Sea and into mainland Europe. The Imperial German government was looking at Great Britain with careful eyes, looking at what the Royal Navy was actually doing. The German intelligence section suggested that the Invincibles would be the size of a dreadnought, but armed with all 8-inch guns. So I can kind of see where they were coming from when it comes to hearing dreadnought armoured cruiser and thinking, it's probably a dreadnought armed with, armoured cruiser guns, beautiful main battery. That's how the dreadnought came about, wasn't it? Well, they were wrong. On the 26th of May in 1906, the Reichstag would authorise funds for the first two Nassau-class dreadnoughts, as well as a large armoured cruiser. We know her as the Blucher. Now, Blucher was authorised as an armoured cruiser, but she was a lot larger than her previous classes that Germany would put to sea. The ship was ordered under the provisional name of E, designed to go toe-to-toe with the latest and greatest of British armoured cruisers at the time. They believed the British were building ships with 6 to 8 9.2-inch guns, so the Germans would order her with 21cm guns. The Germans thought that more shells in the air would cause more damage than slower firing large guns, and its theory would work in the scouting role for which the ship was designed. They would scout for the fleet, destroy the scouts and armed cruisers, and hopefully win the day. The ship that would be designed and authorised would be a vessel of 161.8 metres long, 25.62 metres beam, and a draft of 8.84 metres. Displacement would be 15,842 tonnes as designed, and 17,500 tonnes at full load. She would be fitted with 18 water tube boilers, producing steam for 3 triple expansion engines, turning 3 screws at an indicated 31,500 indicated shaft horsepower, for a top speed of 25.4 knots. Desired range would be 6,600 nautical miles at 12 knots, and 3,350 nautical miles at 18 knots, just enough range for a couple of laps around the North Sea. Her complement would be 41 officers and 812 enlisted sailors. She would be armed with 6 dual 21cm guns in a hexagonal formation, 1 on a raised forecastle, 2 port, 2 starboard facing forward and aft respectively, and 1 on the sense line on the quarterdeck, giving her an 8-gun broadside. The guns were capable of firing an almost 108 kg shell out to 10.3 nautical miles, or 20,900 yards, at a muzzle velocity of 900 meters per second, or 2,953 feet per second, with an average penetration of about 6 inches at 11 to 12,000 yards, or 5.48 nautical miles. The secondary armament consisted of 8 single 15cm guns, 4 per side in casemates, capable of firing a 45.3 kg shell at 835 meters per second, or 2,740 feet per second, to a maximum range of 9.5 nautical miles, or 19,250 yards. 18 single 8.8cm guns, 8 per side in casemates as well as open mounts. These were used in the anti-torpedo boat role, capable of firing a shell between 9 and 10 kilograms with a muzzle velocity of about 890 meters per second, or 2,920 feet per second, out to a maximum range of 6.7 nautical miles, or 12,900 yards. Finally, to round out her armament, she carries 4 17.7-inch torpedo tubes, located one in the bow, one port and one starboard abreast the forward turret, as well as one in the stern. So from that, as you can tell, she was a very well-armed großer cruiser. However, that would bite her in the backside, however. So a week after, the design was authorised and fabrication of plates had started. The naval attaché for Germany got hold of the plans for the Invincibles. They realised the ships were actually armed with battleship-grade weapons, and Blücher couldn't be modified, making her, in the eyes of many, obsolete before she had even had her keel laid. After a decision not to completely scrap the entire project, she would be laid down on the 21st of February 1907, launched on April 11th, 1908, and commissioned on the 1st of October 1909. It was noticed that she was a very large, very under-armoured, and very undergunned warship for her size, though due to the fact that she has multiple 8-inch guns, it was a good idea to use her as a gunnery training vessel, and subsequently the Kaiserliche Marine would use her until 1914, when the first scouting group would stand up. She'd be assigned to this squadron alongside Germany's first battlecruiser, the Von der Tann, as well as the Moltke and the Seydlitz. After the declaration of the First World War, Blücher's first outing of war would be part of an intrusive sweep into the Baltic Sea against the Russian forces on September 3rd, 1914, with the pre-dreadnoughts of the 4th Battle Squadron. 5 cruisers and 24 destroyers would also accompany these ships as they steamed into the Baltic. These ships would try and draw out any Russian ships and lure them towards the pre-dreadnoughts and Blücher. One of the cruisers, the Augsburg, encountered 2 Bayern-class armoured cruisers and promptly ran away, trying to get the Russians to follow. Instead, the Russians would retreat up to the Gulf of Finland. By the 9th, the operation was terminated and the ships returned home without a major engagement or real damage done to any Russian warships. By the 2nd of November, she would be firing her guns in anger for the first time. Blücher would sail with the battlecruiser force, consisting of Moltke, Von der Tann and Seydlitz, as well as 4 accompanying light cruisers, leaving the Jade estuary for the English coast. They would arrive off Great Yarmouth at daybreak on the 3rd, and the ships would open fire on the port, causing minimal damage but mainly blowing up the beach. Now, during the engagement, one of the escorts, the cruiser Stralsund, would lay a minefield. Now, once word of the bombardment got out, the submarine, HMS D5, went to respond with its own bombardment of the battlecruisers, however, with torpedoes. But unknown to her, there was a minefield, and D5 would go down with all but 5 of her crew. Shortly after the minefield claimed its first victim, Admiral Hipper called his ships home. En route, heavy fog was covering the Heligoland Bight, and so the flagship ordered the task group to halt until visibility improved and they were able to safely navigate the Germans' defensive minefields. Once underway, after the fog had cleared, York would hit 2 mines after navigational errors and sink with a loss of 127 men, with 629 being rescued. In mid-December, the task group would put to sea again, this time with its sights on Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby. The idea was to attack and lure out a portion of the Grand Fleet and destroy it. However, the day before the German ships would sail for the operation, the light cruiser Magdeburg ran aground in the Gulf of Finland. The wreck would be captured by the Russians, and they found code books as well as navigational charts of the North Sea, including minefields. These documents were sent to the UK, and they started being decrypted, as well as trying to decrypt German signals. Room 40 would pick up information of this operation, but it's thought that the High Seas Fleet would remain in harbour. But maybe the German battlecruisers would put to sea and attack the English coast, like they did with Scarborough. Admiral Sir John Jellicoe was informed, and he would dispatch a force of dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, cruisers, destroyers, and the idea was to basically go and destroy the raiding force, choosing to let the bombardment happen and catch them when they were heading home. On the 15th, Blücher would sail with Moltke, Von der Tann, Der Flinger and Seydlitz, alongside 4 light cruisers, as well as 2 squadrons of torpedo boats. 12 hours later, the High Seas Fleet put to sea with 14 dreadnoughts, 8 pre-dreadnoughts, a screening force of 2 armoured cruisers, 7 light cruisers, and 54 torpedo boats. On the night of the 15th and 16th, the High Seas Fleet encountered British destroyers and turned home. Unknown about the course reversal, Hipper, in charge of the battlecruisers, would continue with the mission. Blucher's target would be Hartlepool. However, unknown to the Germans, the coastal town was armed with artillery positions. In the subsequent engagement, she would be hit by 6 shells by the coastal artillery. She would suffer minimal damage, however 9 men were killed and 3 more were wounded. By the mid-morning of the 16th, the German vessels had regrouped and retreated back to Germany. By the point the German ships started to retreat, Beatty had positioned his battlecruisers in a way to basically stop the battlecruisers from getting home, as well as parts of the Grand Fleet were in the process of springing their trap. However, the cruiser Stralsund would be part of a screening force, however behind the actual German fleet. She would signal a report to a British warship. Somehow, don't understand how you can signal a British warship, but hey ho, that's German specs for you. Anyway, moving swiftly on. So, Beatty would turn the battlecruisers in towards the German ship. Now, Beatty believed that the German ships were behind the cruisers, as any normal person would think. However, the ships were actually about 30 miles ahead of the Stralsund, and so they would get home safely. By January 1915, Blücher would leave Germany for the last time, as she would sail for the Battle of Dogger Bank. The Germans had found out the British were conducting reconnaissance of the Dogger Bank area. Admiral Ingenhol wasn't happy about going to battle, as he did turn away a month earlier from 11 destroyers. Additionally, he did not want to put the first scouting group to sea, as Von der Tann was in dry dock for periodic maintenance. The chief of the High Seas Fleet, Konter-Amiral Richard Erckmann, insisted on the operation, and so Ingenhol would order the Hipper to put to sea with his battlecruisers. On the 25th of January, Hipper would sortie with Seydlitz, Moltke, Der Flinger and Blücher, along with the 4 light cruisers and 19 torpedo boats. The British would, however, decrypt the wireless signals and be able to deduce that Hipper was conducting an operation in the Dogger Bank area. On the 24th, the Battle of Dogger Bank would take place. Hipper had sailed the Germans into a British trap. The British had put to sea 5 battlecruisers, 7 light cruisers and 35 destroyers. By 0814, Kohlberg spotted a light from the light cruiser HMS Aurora and several destroyers from the Harwich force. Aurora would challenge the Kohlberg with a searchlight, and so battle would commence. The battlecruisers, with Blücher at the rear of the line, turned towards the light cruiser. However, mid-turn, the Germans would pick up wireless traffic from the battlecruisers and saw a large plume of smoke on the horizon, indicative of a large surface combatant. Hipper had walked into the British trap. Hipper was forced to turn south to flee, but he was limited by Blücher's speed of 23 knots at the time due to Germany using absolutely shocking coal. Anyway, the British would be bearing down on the task group at about 27 knots. The lead ship of the British line would be HMS Lion, the lead ship of the Splendid Cats. At 0952, Lion, Princess Royal and Tiger would open fire at 20,000 yards respectively. By 10:09, Blücher would be hit for the first time. 2 minutes later, she and her German sisters would engage the British, shooting at Lion. The lead ship of the British line was HMS Lion, Beatty's flagship. At 0952, Lion, Princess Royal and Tiger would open fire at about 20,000 yards respectively. By 10:09, Blücher was hit for the first time. 2 minutes later, her and her German sister ships would engage the British line, shooting at HMS Lion. At about the same time that Lion would be hit and struck on her belt, which flooded a coal bunker, Blücher would hit a Lion's A turret. However, the small shell didn't penetrate the roof of the turret, but it would knock out the left-hand gun. By 25:11, the range was now down to 17,500 yards, and the whole German line was an effective firing range. Beatty ordered his line to hit their counterparts in the German line. By the turn of 1100, Blücher was severely damaged, being smashed apart by heavy shells from the British line. In return, Seydlitz, Deflinger and Moltke shot up the Lion, knocking out 2 dynamos. Her port engines were shot up and flooded, resulting in Beatty having to change his command to HMS Princess Royal. By this point, Blücher was lifting heavily to port. She was on fire and at risk of going under. One of the ship's survivors, a member of the Marine Engineering Department, spoke of the carnage inside. The shells bore down even to the stokehold. The coal in the bunkers was set afire. Since the bunkers were half empty, the fire burned merrily. In the engine room, a shell licked up the oil and sprayed it in flames of green and blue. The terrific air pressure resulting from an explosion in the confined space roared through every opening and tore its way through even the weak spots. Men were picked up by the terrific air pressure and tossed to horrible death among the machinery. Prior to his departure from the Lion, Beatty signalled New Zealand to finish off the Blücher, as well as the rest of the fleet to engage the enemy's rear. However, confusion over the signal put 26 13.5-inch guns and 16 12-inch guns to bear on the poor Blücher. The shells ripped Blücher apart, causing her to increase her list more to port. Her guns were still operational, well, some were. She would repulse an attack from the 1st Cruiser Squadron, but Aurora would slam 2 torpedoes into her port side, but she still wasn't going down yet. Her aft turret was still in operation and still firing. A second volley of 7 torpedoes were launched at the ship, and that would put her down for good, being launched from point-blank range from destroyers. They hit alongside her port side, and this would seal her fate. Before she heeled over and capsized, a couple of British destroyers went in to try and pick up survivors, but accounts state a Zeppelin, the L5, mistook the Blücher for a sinking battlecruiser, and they promptly bombed the destroyers. Blücher would roll over and quickly take many of her crew with her. Reports vary on how many crew were actually saved, but figures between 741 and just under 1,000 crew went down with her. Another 21 personnel would die afterwards, including the captain of the ship, who would die of pneumonia. All in all, she would take 70 to 100 heavy caliber shells and 9 torpedoes to sink, making her surprisingly durable. Those are similar numbers to the hit as the Bismarck took to sink about 24 years later. After the Blücher had sank, the German ships would return home. Hipper wanted to turn around and actually try and help the Blücher, but in his own words, in order to help the Blücher, it was decided to try for a flanking manoeuvre. But I was informed that my flagship's turrets C and D were out of action, we were full of water aft, and that she only had 200 rounds of heavy shell left. I dismissed any further thought of supporting the Blücher. Any such course, now that no intervention from our main fleet was to be counted on, was likely to lead to further heavy losses. The support of the Blücher by the flanking move would have brought my formation between the British battlecruisers and the battle squadron, which were probably behind. Hipper subsequently put the needs of the many before the needs of the few, and kept the rest of the battlecruisers in one piece. Somewhat. Seydlitz would need dry docking for major repairs, and others took about minimal bit of damage. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm II wasn't a happy bunny when he found out Blücher was on the bottom and Seydlitz was out of action for months. He ordered the High Seas Fleet to remain in port. Rear Admiral Eckenham was removed from his post and Admiral Ingenol was forced to resign due to the disaster. Blücher now rests 60 metres down, 50 kilometres north of Dogger Bank. She is now designated as a war grave. Thank you very much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Before you go, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with my latest videos, as well as commenting, and if you want to, subscribe to the Patreon page to support the channel. All I need to say is, here's a sneak peek at next week's video.